The movie begins with a couple who are having sex in their room. Afterwards, the man, who is now wearing an army uniform, sits still until he suddenly runs to the bathroom and throws up while being comforted by his girlfriend. Turns out that the man, Ronnie, is nervous about being deployed as a soldier. While he prepares to leave with his friend Gil, his girlfriend Ray throws a fit about him leaving, stating that it'll ruin their relationship. Ronnie tries to calm her down and convince her that they'll work out, before giving her matching watches and finally leaving their home. Once Ronnie is gone, Ray cries out in sadness, until suddenly, she starts feeling uncomfort in her groin. Apparently, Ray is a nymphomaniac who is addicted to sex, so she goes to a hotel room to have sex with a man named Tyron. He thinks that she is a slut for doing it while she has a boyfriend, but she doesn't want to talk about it. Meanwhile, on another side of town, a man named Lazarus is wallowing about his failed relationship with his wife outside a restaurant. His friend RL tries to lift his spirit by praying together with him before he goes into the restaurant. Inside, he is then greeted with his wife, Rose, who apparently cheated on him with his little brother and chooses to leave their marriage. Rose wants to get Lazarus' blessing, but he doesn't want to give it to her, causing her to get upset and leave the restaurant. That night, Lazarus goes to his friend's bar to drown his sorrow. After being seduced by a woman, he is greeted by none other than his brother, who is still trying to get his blessing to have a relationship with his ex-wife. However, Lazarus thinks that it's a mockery for him and decides to attack his brother and threatens him with a broken bottle. Thankfully, he steps away before actually hurting his brother and leaves the bar to head home. In a different part of town, Ray is going to a party with her friends and complains about Ronnie leaving her. While she is talking to a friend, Ray sees Gil and approaches him, who says that he's not Ronnie's spy and doesn't care if she goes out to party. So, Ray ends up getting drunk and playing baseball with only her underwear on, even having sex with someone on the field. When everyone is gone, she tries to walk home but is too drunk, and Gil comes to pick her up and puts her in his truck. On the way, he starts talking about how she could have sex with anyone but Tyron, just because he's black. When he tries to make a move on her, Ray mocks him by saying that his private parts isn't even half of Tyron's, which causes Gil to get angry and beats her up. When she passes out and can't be waken up, he decides to ditch her on the road and leaves. The next morning, Lazarus is taking out the trash after being on the phone with RL, who invites him to church. While standing on the road, he sees Ray, who is lying on the road all bloody and unconscious. He thinks that she is dead until she coughs and startles him, so he brings her back to his house and puts her down on the sofa. He tries to wake her up, but Ray only half-consciously says Tyron's name, which makes Lazarus think that he's the one who beat her up. He then tells her to stay put as he goes to town to buy her some medicine. In the pharmacy, he meets with a friend who is a pharmacist named Angela. He tells her that his niece is sick and needs some medicine, so Angela prepares a prescription drug to give to Lazarus free of charge. When he plans to leave, he instead decides to meet Tyron first to confirm if he's the one who beat Ray up. However, when asked about her, Tyron indicates that he never hurt her and that she's actually a nymphomaniac. Meanwhile, back in Lazarus' home, Ray is having a vivid nightmare that causes her to try and get away, although her injuries cause her to pass out again on the floor. Lazarus comes home to see her state, and throughout the days, he keeps having to find Ray and take her back to his home whenever she gets vivid nightmares. He decides to put a chain on Ray to prevent her from going too far or getting hurt again. After a few days of being unconscious, Ray finally comes to and is surprised to be in a stranger's home. She says thank you to Lazarus for taking care of her and wants to leave. However, she discovers that she is chained up. It turns out that Lazarus is planning on trying to cure Ray's nymphomania, as he thinks it's a wicked disease and doesn't plan to release her until she's cured. Ray protests and tries to run away from the house, although she can't get rid of the chain and ultimately gets dragged back into the house. When she gives up, Lazarus offers her some food which he grew there himself as he is a farmer. That night, Lazarus keeps taking care of Ray and her injuries, which are getting better. He then asks Ray why she would be treated so lowly by random guys, and goes on about the sanctity of marriage until he suddenly has an outburst of emotions about his ex-wife cheating on him and killing his baby. When Ray kicks him away, He comes back to his senses and apologizes for lashing out. Ray tries to seduce him to sleep with her, but he is unfazed and goes to his room instead. Feeling one of her sex spells starting, Ray can only wrap the chains around her body. The following day, Lazarus goes to town to buy Ray some proper clothes and also to give a basket of produce to Angela as a thank you for the free medicine. Meanwhile, Ray tries to open the chain to no avail and decides to steal one of Lazarus' cigarettes instead. Suddenly, a teenage boy named Lincoln shows up to Lazarus' house to ask for some peanut butter. Ray, who is inside, tries to hide from Lincoln while holding down her urges. He goes away but then decides to come into the house, and Ray immediately opens her shirt. Not long after, Lazarus comes back home and kicks Lincoln out for having sex with Ray. Then, RL drives up to Lazarus' house just as he sees Lincoln run away. However, Lazarus tells him to leave as nobody is allowed near his house, even threatening RL with a gun. RL tells him to shoot, but he instead gives up his gun to RL, who asks him what's going on. Lazarus tells RL to see for himself, as he enters the house and sees Ray shirtless on the floor. RL knows that Ray has been sleeping around with many men from town and thinks that Lazarus has been sleeping with her too. But Lazarus tells him the whole story and says that he hasn't laid a hand on her and that he wants RL to talk some sense into Ray so she can stop being a nymphomaniac. He does it, and Ray asks him if he's a preacher before wondering why God wants to give heaven to people who think that they can be forgiven after hurting someone just by saying sorry. Hearing this, RL tells her that he prays to God whenever there's no one else to turn to, and that he asks God for strength to face the sin in his heart every day, not just when he's old and about to die. Meanwhile, Lazarus goes to a shed behind his house to talk to Lincoln about having his first time with Ray. He says to Lincoln that it's not his fault and tells a story about his own first time having sex. He then offers the boy a cigarette, which the boy refuses politely. Not long after, Ray changes into a dress that Lazarus bought for her and helps him prepare some food for lunch with RL and Lincoln. They all enjoy the meal together, and Ray seems to be quite happy about it. That night, Ray and Lazarus have a drink together and Lazarus decides to unchain her, as he thinks that it's not his right to try and change how someone wants to live their life. He asks if Ray wants to be taken to town, but instead, she asks him to play a song for her instead. Lazarus plays his old guitar and sings a song about how his dark thoughts can sometimes come to haunt him, calling those dark thoughts as the Black Snake Moan. Somewhere else in town, Ronnie had just gotten off a bus and goes into a bar to meet Gil. Gil wonders why he came back so soon, and it turns out that the army is still considering if Ronnie should be deployed, as he apparently has severe anxiety which impacts his ability to shoot properly. Ronnie then asks Gil about Ray, as he can't call her, but Gil says that Ray is fine and around the town somewhere. They then go to the house where Ronnie and Ray lived in and finds that nothing had been changed. Ronnie is worried about Ray, but Gil says that Ronnie had ruined his big life plans by dating Ray, who he deems as a high school slut. Ronnie obviously gets mad at this, saying that Ray had helped him with his anxiety while she also has a painful trauma, but is faithful to him. Gil scoffs and lies to Ronnie by saying that she wanted to have sex with Gil not long after Ronnie left. But Ronnie doesn't believe him and the two men end up fighting instead. The next day, Lazarus takes Ray to town as she wants to shop some supplies, although she is still uncomfortable confronting her mother, who works in the grocery store. She decides to muster some courage and go inside, finding her mother working in the store. Ray asks her to go on a coffee date to catch up sometime. However, her mother dismisses it as they were never close together, but Ray says that she wants to change it. Her mother still ignores her attempt, so Ray tries to confront her for not stopping her then boyfriend, who apparently sexually assaulted Ray as a child. Ray's mother tries to feign ignorance, but Ray retaliates and gets angry at her for not admitting it, hitting her with a broom and throwing stuff at her until some employees have to hold her back. Meanwhile, Lazarus sets up shop from the back of his truck. Suddenly, Angela approaches him and asks him on a small picnic as a thank you for the produce he brought her. They go on the impromptu date on the town square, and it seems like the two really enjoy each other's company. Suddenly, he sees the commotion from the grocery store and decides to check it out, seeing Ray in a panicked fit. He tells the others to get away from her and carries her out the store, while Angela sees them and thinks that the two have a relationship. They leave anyway, and Lazarus brings her to his house and bathes her. The two tries to sleep that night, but Lazarus decides that they're both night owls. So he instead brings Ray to his friend's bar as he intends to finally perform again. The bar is packed, as it turns out that RL and his bar owner friend had invited many people to watch Lazarus come back. They all enjoy his performance, and Ray dances her worries away with everyone in the bar. The following morning, Ray and Lazarus are playing a song together when suddenly, Ronnie comes into the house and hits Lazarus, accusing Ray of being together with him not long after he left for deployment. Ray begs him to stop, but Ronnie aims his gun at Lazarus, who instead of being afraid, tells Ronnie to go ahead and shoot him if he's trying to prove himself as a real man. Eventually, Ronnie gives up because of his anxiety, and Ray calms him down while Lazarus calls RL to come over. When RL arrives, he tries to guide the couple into talking about how they feel towards each other. Ronnie says that Ray has helped him with his anxiety, but he feels bad because he can't help Ray with her nymphomania. Ray then explains how her sex spells occur whenever she has thoughts about her past sexual abuse and cannot get rid of them. However, Ronnie apparently helps her overcome it. She then tells him they're both not normal and she understands if he wants to leave her, although she wishes that he stays. RL then asks them what they want to do, and Lazarus comes to Angela's house to ask her for another favor. It turns out that they are preparing for an impromptu wedding of Ray and Ronnie, where Lincoln becomes Ronnie's best man and Angela becomes Ray's maid of honor. Before the ceremony, Lazarus tells Ray to live her life the best she can and that they'll always have hope for each other while they both hug. RL leads the wedding ceremony, while Angela and Lazarus watch as they hold hands. The movie ends with Ray and Ronnie driving away until Ronnie gets an anxiety attack and Ray gets one of her sex spells. However, she steals herself and instead helps Ronnie calm down by singing a song to him, telling him that they're going to be all right. That is the end of the recap. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video.